I'm Charlotte Reynolds, 31 years old, living in Oregon with my husband Nathan. I'm an artist, bookstore owner, and until recently, I still tried to believe my family would show up when it mattered. I grew up in a small town of my parents, Richard and Elaine, and my younger brother, Tyler. Growing up, I always thought love meant loyalty. Turns out, not everyone sees it the same way. What happened at my wedding broke something in me, but it also built something stronger. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, this story is for you. Please like, share, and subscribe if this hits home for you or someone you love. Let's stop pretending silence is normal. Let's talk about it. Can I tell you something? It sounds made up. Like the kind of story you'd scroll past and think, that's too dramatic to be real. But it happened. On my wedding day, I stood in a quiet room, fully dressed, bouquet ready, breath held. Guests were arriving. The sun was soft and golden. Everything looked perfect. Except my parents weren't there. No call, no text, no excuse, nothing. And then my phone buzzed. I thought, maybe they're late. Maybe there's a flat tire, or they're outside the venue. But no. It was a message from my mom. "Sweetie, we're so sorry. Max has his graduation today. He's worked so hard. We'll make it up to you soon. Love, Mom and Dad." Max isn't a cousin, not an uncle. Max is a dog, my brother's golden retriever. And the graduation? Obedience school. Cap and gown included. I stared at the message for a long time. I read it once, twice, waiting for the words to change, like maybe I'd misread it. But they didn't. Max had worked hard, and that, apparently, was worth missing their daughter's wedding for. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just went still. Completely, terrifyingly still. Then I turned off the phone, set it face down on the nightstand, and went back to folding napkins. What else could I do? I had a wedding to host. When Nathan, my husband, came back from walking with his dad, he asked if my parents had replied. I smiled, weak and rehearsed. "Maybe they want to surprise me," I said, pretending it didn't matter. He didn't push. He just placed his hands gently on my shoulders and said, "This day is about us." I nodded, but something in me had already stepped outside the moment, detached, watching from a distance. At 3:30 p.m., I walked down the aisle alone. My best friend offered to walk with me, but I declined. I needed to feel it. I needed to acknowledge the absence instead of pretending it wasn't there. The chairs in the front row were labeled "Parents of the Bride." Still empty. Still waiting. No one touched them. No one dared. Delora, Nathan's mom, had quietly placed a small bouquet on the chairs, like she was trying to soften the blow without pointing it out. It didn't help. Not really. Because absence doesn't need a spotlight. It fills every corner of the room without asking. After the ceremony, I smiled in photos. I laughed during toasts. I danced through the first song. But inside, I was on autopilot. Floating. A guest at my own wedding. Then, during the reception, my friend Daria showed me her phone. She looked unsure, like she didn't know whether to show me, but she did. "Charlotte, I think you should see this." It was a live stream, titled, "Max's Big Day, Obedience Graduation." There on the screen was my mom, sitting front row, clapping proudly. My dad, leaning into the camera and saying, "He's our pride and joy." Max was wearing a little tuxedo harness and wagging his tail. A cake behind him, shaped like a bone. Everyone looked so proud, so present, just not for me. And in that moment, it all became clear. They didn't miss my wedding because they forgot. They missed it because they chose something else. Someone else. I wasn't overlooked. I was replaced by a dog. And that somehow hurt more than I knew how to explain. Because they remembered the date. They dressed up. They brought a camera. They clapped. They cried. Just not for me. They chose their seat that day, and it wasn't at my wedding. They didn't call. They didn't text. They didn't show up. But they posted an Instagram story. My mother, on her personal account. A boomerang clip of Bruno, my brother's golden retriever, wearing a tiny graduation cap, sitting proudly on a little stage at some suburban obedience school. The camera panned across a banner behind him that read, "Pause and Praise, Class of 2025. He wagged his tail and tilted his head like he knew he was being watched. Then the video looped again, over and over, while I was standing in the mirror, adjusting the back of my veil, making sure it didn't get caught in the buttons, while I was pressing my fingertips together just to keep them from shaking, while I was telling myself that maybe, just maybe, they'd walk in at the last second. Maybe they wanted to make an entrance. Maybe they didn't want to ruin their makeup. Maybe they were stuck in traffic. But deep down, I knew. I had known for hours. I had known the moment they sent that text. I just didn't want to admit it to myself. Because it's one thing to say your parents aren't coming. It's another to realize they're not coming because they're already somewhere else, cheering for someone else. A dog. A four-legged animal who was, apparently, more obedient and more worthy of their attention than I had ever been. I watched the story again, Bruno sitting like a good boy, my mom's caption, "So proud of our little man," my dad in the background, clapping enthusiastically. My aunt commented, "He's the best boy." A family friend replied, "This is adorable," all while I was getting married, alone. I walked down the aisle by myself. My best friend had offered to walk with me. She practically begged, but I said no. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to walk through the silence, to honor what was missing instead of pretending it wasn't. The sun was beautiful, gentle, a golden wash across the lawn. Our venue was small but magical. String lights, wildflowers, mismatched wooden chairs we hand-picked at antique shops. Nathan stood at the front, his hands folded, his eyes glassy with emotion, but I could barely look at him. Not because I didn't love him. God, I did. But because I didn't want him to see what I was carrying. I didn't want him to see the hole in me, the part that had hoped, even after everything, even after years of being second place to my brother, to expectations, to silence. I still thought they'd come. I passed 2 empty chairs in the front row, reserved, labeled. I had printed the cards myself. Parents of the bride. I made them in cursive. I used nice paper. I don't know why. No one else even saw them, but I did. Every time I looked up, they were still there, untouched by presence, untouched by love, untouched by anyone willing to carry what I had always carried alone. Delora, Nathan's mom, had placed a small bouquet next to the chairs before the ceremony. She didn't ask for permission, she just did it, quietly, gently, like she was trying to put a hand over a bruise, as if flowers could soften the absence. as if petals could explain away what absence really meant. I could feel people glancing at them. No one said anything, but silence is never truly silent. It's thick. It hums under the surface. It lives in how people shift their feet, in how they avoid eye contact, in how they look at you just a second too long before smiling like nothing's wrong. The chairs stayed empty. They became monuments, not of grief, but of clarity, of truth that could no longer be spun into something polite. After the ceremony, Nathan squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did it." I smiled back, but I was somewhere else, still staring at those chairs, still imagining an alternate reality where my mom straightened my veil, where my dad said, "You look beautiful, sweetheart," where I didn't have to ask myself why I wasn't enough. But that world didn't exist. It never did. What I had was a dog in a cap, a live stream, a public declaration of pride that didn't belong to me. They didn't forget. They remembered something else more. And now, so would I. 3 days after the wedding, just when the air had started to settle and the leftover cake had gone a little dry in the fridge, I received a package at the door. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. I carried it into the kitchen. It was light, but not meaningless. Something about the weight of it felt smug. Wrapped in bright paper, not white or silver like a wedding gift, no. It was printed with cartoon dog bones, little paws, tail-wagging energy. My stomach dropped. I hadn't even opened it yet. I already knew. I peeled the tape slowly, carefully, like unwrapping a bomb. And inside, as expected, was a box of absurdity. A plush, squeaky toy shaped like a heart. A rubber bone wrapped in gold foil like it was some kind of luxury treat. And a card. The card was what stopped me. On the front, a smiling cartoon retriever holding a ring in its mouth. Inside, written in my mother's neat, slanted cursive, "Hope your marriage is as obedient as Bruno. From Bruno." There was an actual paw print sketched underneath, off-center, slightly smug. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a weird joke from someone who didn't understand timing. This was intentional. A weird wedding gift in every sense of the word. And not from family. From the dog. That was the moment it stopped being sad and became something else. Something colder. This wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was performance. Passive-aggressive family energy perfectly curated and mailed to my doorstep 3 days after the wedding they refused to attend. Who sends a wedding gift from a pet? Who replaces a daughter with a dog and thinks they can get away with it by wrapping it in glitter and humor? I held the card in my hand and just stared. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. It was like I was watching a scene written by someone trying too hard to be cruel without being caught. Like they wanted to make a statement but still call it a misunderstanding if I reacted. This wasn't just a cruel wedding moment. This was legacy work. They were rewriting what happened. In their version, they didn't abandon me. They just celebrated differently.
In their version, Bruno was a family hero, and I was inconvenient.
The worst part? I almost threw it away. Almost stuffed the card, the toy, the rubber bone into the trash. But something made me pause. I wanted to remember this. Not out of bitterness, but because this was the moment everything snapped into focus. This wasn't about the dog. This wasn't even about the wedding. This was about hierarchy, about choice, about who gets celebrated and who gets sent a squeaky toy and a fake paw print when they thought they might get love. I took out the journal I'd started, the black one with no lines, the one where I taped the Pine Ridge invoice. I turned the page, taped in the dog card. Beneath it, I wrote, "They didn't miss my wedding. They mailed their absence with glitter." People always say things like, maybe it was just their way of showing love. But let me be clear, dog over daughter isn't love. It's a decision, one made with clarity, one they doubled down on by mailing it with stamps and celebration. And maybe that's the part that hurt the most. Not the message itself, but the fact that someone sat down, picked that card, wrote in it, licked the envelope shut, and thought, yes, this feels right. Unbelievable true story, people say. And it is. I wouldn't believe it either if it weren't my name on the box. My name and no mention of Nathan. No congratulations, no sorry we couldn't be there. Just a dog, wearing obedience like a badge of honor. I didn't tell Nathan about the gift. Not right away. I needed to sit with it alone, let it burn through me cleanly. I placed the box on a shelf inside the guest room closet. Not hidden, not thrown away, just cataloged. Like all the other quiet injuries you gather from toxic family dynamics. You don't always bleed from them. Sometimes they just bruise. Deep, slow, permanent. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house had fallen into that strange, heavy quiet that only comes after celebration, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, barefoot, in Nathan's hoodie and my old pajama shorts, holding a half glass of Prosecco that had gone flat hours ago. The box from Bruno, the wedding gift from the dog, was still on the table. I hadn't moved it, just kept looking at it like it might explain something if I stared long enough. I reached for my phone. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Distraction, maybe. Noise. But instead, I opened my bank app. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me was just trying to make sense of things. I started scrolling through old transactions, flipping through them the way some people flip through old photos. Then I saw it. 9 months ago, a $750 transfer to Pine Ridge Obedience School. The name hit me like a slap. Not because I didn't recognize it, but because I did. Too well. It was me. I had paid for Bruno's training. I funded the very thing they chose instead of me, the cap and gown, the obedience certificate, the celebration they prioritized over their own daughter's wedding. I paid for it, with my own money. My hands went cold. The phone slipped slightly in my grip. I just stared at the screen, unable to blink, unable to breathe. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, but it wasn't. I remembered the conversation. Tyler had messaged the family group chat about how expensive obedience school was, how Bruno had already been kicked out of one program, how this was his last shot, and me, in my usual effort to be the peacemaker, the dependable one, the invisible daughter who solves problems before she even says she has them, I offered. "I'll cover it," I wrote. "It's fine. Consider it my gift." I had meant it. At the time, I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be the thing that finally made me visible, the thing that got me a seat at the table. I didn't realize I was buying my own erasure. This wasn't just a heartbreaking realization. It was humiliation. Deep, layered humiliation. Family financial manipulation disguised as generosity. I gave them money, and in return, they gave me absence. I paid for the weekend they clapped, cheered, and filmed the dog sitting on command while I walked down the aisle alone. I funded my own rejection. It was too absurd to cry about, too clean to argue. This was the moment where sadness folds into silence. I placed the phone face down on the table. I didn't even have the strength to throw it. Nathan walked in quietly. He saw my face. He didn't ask. He just sat beside me, close but not touching, like he could sense I needed a few more inches of space to process something I wasn't ready to say out loud. I whispered, "I paid for it." He didn't respond right away, didn't even blink. Then, "What?" I didn't look at him. I couldn't. "Bruno's training. I paid for it 9 months ago." He exhaled like he'd been punched, and still he didn't speak. We just sat there in the quiet kitchen, two people stunned by how far some people would go to say they don't choose you. I stood up, walked into the guest room, opened the drawer with the black journal. I printed the receipt from my email, taped it onto a fresh page. Above it, I wrote in all caps, "This is what invisibility costs." No one else may have seen it, but I needed it documented. For me, for the version of me that still, somewhere deep down, hoped for a phone call, a sorry, a reversal. That version of me deserved a record of the truth. Funding your own pain shouldn't be poetic, but in families like mine, it becomes tradition. It becomes how we're trained, like dogs, to stay quiet, to behave, to love without asking for it back. And maybe that's what broke me more than anything. Not the absence, not the dog, but the realization that I was complicit in my own vanishing, because I believed I had to earn the space I was born into. I didn't, and I never will again. The morning after I taped the receipt into my journal, I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone. The air in the house was still. Nathan had already left for work. The quiet felt louder than usual. I hadn't planned to call. I didn't even know what I would say, but I opened the message thread anyway, the one with my mom. The last message from her was the same. "Max has his graduation today. He's been working so hard." I read it again, like I hadn't already memorized every word. Then, before I could stop myself, I tapped the call button. It rang once, twice. Then a voice I hadn't heard in months. "Hello?" It was my dad, flat, emotionless, like someone answering a customer service line. "Hi," I said. "It's me." A pause, not surprise, not warmth, just silence. I was hoping to talk to Mom. He didn't ask how I was, didn't say he was glad I called, just said, "She's busy. What do you need?" I hesitated. My voice almost cracked, but I swallowed it down. I just wanted to ask, "Why didn't you come?" He didn't hesitate. "We told you." Bruno had his graduation. As if that explained everything, as if I'd forgotten. A lump rose in my throat. I tried again. "You didn't think your daughter's wedding was more important than a dog learning to sit?" Another pause. Then some movement, muffled sounds, a handoff. And suddenly it was her, my mother. Her voice smooth, calm, polished like always. "Charlotte," she said, "sweetie, you know dogs are loyal. They don't abandon family over drama." That was it. No hello, no apology, just that. Like a slap disguised as a proverb. It wasn't a defense, it was a dismissal, a rewrite of history. I wanted to scream, to shout at her, to ask if she even knew what she'd done, but all I could do was breathe and let the silence sit between us like a wall. I realized in that moment this wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was her belief. In her eyes, I was dramatic, emotional, difficult. And Bruno? Bruno sat. Bruno stayed. Bruno didn't ask for love. He just existed in quiet praise. He was easier to celebrate than a daughter who needed answers. I ended the call without another word. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say thank you. Just pressed end and stared at the ceiling. It felt like hanging up on a lifetime, like letting go of a rope I'd been pulling for years, hoping it would finally pull back. But it never had, and it never would. That day passed in a blur. I went to the bookstore, handled returns, helped customers with the usual questions, best summer reads, gifts for teachers. I smiled, I nodded. I moved through it like nothing had happened. But every time I blinked, I heard her voice again. Dogs are loyal. And mine? I had done everything. I had stayed, I had paid, I had hoped, I had planned a wedding and left 2 chairs open, and still, somehow, I was the disloyal one. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. That night I wrote again, in the journal. Beneath the receipt and the dog card I wrote, "She wasn't defending her choice. She was insulting mine." That sentence felt like closure, like the first honest sentence I had ever written about our relationship. Final conversation with toxic parent doesn't always give you clarity, but it gives you edges, boundaries, places to stop bleeding. I didn't expect a follow-up call, and of course there wasn't one. No apology from parents, no realization, no change of heart. That phone call was the confirmation, not of what happened at the wedding, but of everything before it. The missed birthdays, the skipped recitals, the conversations that always circled back to my tone, not my words. It was never about what I said, only how uncomfortable it made them. For years I thought maybe I just wasn't lovable in the way they needed. Maybe if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, helpful enough, I would earn a space in their pride. But now I knew. There was no space to earn. That wasn't a daughter-mother gap. That was a brick wall dressed in politeness. Toxic mother-daughter relationship doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it sounds like iced over wisdom. Sometimes it sounds like, "Sweetie, you know dogs are loyal." I turned off my phone, not just for the day, but for me. I wasn't going to call again, not tomorrow, not next month, not next year. There would be no second try. I didn't need it. Because that call didn't break me, it freed me. They didn't want a daughter, they wanted silence. And I had finally stopped delivering it. After that call, I didn't cry. I didn't scream into a pillow or punch the wall. I just sat there in the middle of our hallway, the phone still warm in my hand, and realized how quiet my body had become. There was no storm left, just this deep, slow stillness, a kind of grief that didn't need drama. I stood up and walked to the bedroom. The black journal was where I left it, tucked neatly in the drawer next to the wedding album. I opened the last page, then flipped to a new one. I took a pen and wrote. She told me dogs are loyal, so I became my own. Then I closed the book, pressed my hand to the cover, and didn't open it again that night. The next morning I woke with a different kind of clarity. Not rage, not resolve, just decision. A quiet, grounded decision to stop performing for people who would never clap. I started a list. It was short, practical, sharp. 1. Remove parents from emergency contact. 2. Update medical records. 3. Remove from will. 4. New passwords. 5. Block numbers. Not out of hate, out of necessity. Cutting ties with toxic family isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks like changing paperwork. Sometimes it looks like deleting birthdays from your calendar. Sometimes it looks like reclaiming space in your own mind. That afternoon, I walked to the post office and filed the change of contact forms. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. I signed the papers with a hand that didn't shake. I walked out into the sunlight feeling not lighter, but more real, like the version of me that kept waiting for recognition had finally been put to rest. At home, I took out the wedding album. I stared at the photos. Me, Nathan, the people who came. The 2 empty chairs were there too, barely visible in some shots, hauntingly clear in others. I didn't rip them out. I didn't cross them out. I just looked, accepted. Then I gently closed the book and set it on the shelf. That part of the story was done. Grief without drama is the kind that lasts, but it also teaches, and I was finally ready to learn. Later, I took the black journal one last time. Inside, I printed 2 photos, one of the chairs and one of the obedience school live streams still paused on Bruno. I taped them on opposite pages. Underneath the first, I wrote, "This is where they should have been." Under the second, "This is where they chose to be." I didn't cry while I did it. There was no more crying left, just truth. And truth doesn't always need tears. It just needs space. That evening, I lit a candle in the kitchen. Not for ritual, not for symbolism, just for warmth. Nathan came home and saw the journal still out. He didn't say anything, just walked over, poured me tea, and kissed the top of my head. That's the thing about love that shows up. It doesn't demand a headline. It just fills the silence. Quiet emotional healing doesn't look like a breakthrough. It looks like dishes done without asking. It looks like someone handing you a blanket without a speech. Before bed, I wrote one final line in the journal. I don't owe anyone my silence anymore. Then I tucked the journal back into the drawer, locked it, not to hide it, but to mark that I was done documenting pain. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I had survived it. Reclaiming self-worth isn't a moment, it's a process. And sometimes that process looks like small paperwork and big freedom. The next morning, I woke up without dread. No missed calls, no waiting, just stillness. Not the kind that holds its breath, but the kind that exhales. Letting go of family pain isn't easy. But it starts the moment you decide, I deserve better than breadcrumbs. I deserve more than paw prints and silence. I deserve presence. And I'm finally choosing it. 3 days after I closed the journal, I found myself staring at a photo on my phone. It was one of the few I hadn't posted. I had scrolled past it a dozen times in the gallery, but never had the heart to share. It was taken right after the ceremony, sunlight pouring in behind me, lace on my sleeves glowing. But what made the photo stick wasn't the lighting or the dress. It was the 2 chairs in the front row. Empty, still, waiting. The name cards were visible if you look close enough. Parents of the bride. I stared at that image longer than I meant to. Something about it felt unfinished, like it was still holding something that needed to be released. I opened Instagram, not with a plan, not with strategy, just instinct. I uploaded the photo, no filters, no edits. I typed a caption, paused, then wrote, "Respect was RSVP'd but never showed." I didn't tag anyone, didn't explain, just posted and locked my phone. It was out of me now. I didn't think much of it. Maybe a few close friends would see, maybe someone would DM me a heart emoji. But by the time I checked my phone the next morning, the post had exploded. Overnight it had gone viral. Viral wedding story was trending. People shared it, stitched it, reposted it. Someone made a collage, me in my wedding dress on the left, Bruno in his graduation cap on the right. The contrast was painful, but honest. The comments were endless. Thousands. Women, men, strangers. People writing, "This happened to me, too. My mom didn't show up either. I walked alone, too. Thank you for sharing what I couldn't say out loud." I wasn't alone. That's what hit me hardest. I had spent so much time believing my story was too absurd to be real. But it wasn't absurd. It was heartbreakingly common. Family betrayal goes viral not because it's rare, but because it's universal. Because too many people are told they're too sensitive, too dramatic, too much, when in reality, they're just asking to be seen. A producer from a local talk show messaged me. "We'd love to have you on," she wrote. "Your post is resonating with so many. If you're ready to talk about it, we're here." I wasn't sure I was ready. But I also wasn't sure I wanted silence anymore, so I said yes. 2 days later, I walked into a studio with Nathan holding my hand. The lights were too bright. The makeup was heavier than I liked. But I sat down. I adjusted the mic. And when the host asked, "Why did you post that photo?" I looked straight at the camera and said, "Because silence was never mutual. It was imposed. And I'm not carrying it anymore." The room went quiet. Not in a bad way, in the kind of way where people are finally listening. I pulled out the printed card from Bruno's gift box. I unfolded it, read it out loud. "Hope your marriage is as obedient as Bruno." From Bruno. Gasps. Murmurs. The host blinked like she didn't know what to say. Then finally, "They missed your wedding for that?" I nodded. "They didn't miss it," I said. "They chose something else." That clip alone hit 1 million views. Telling my truth became a hashtag people used to share their own stories. The internet didn't laugh. It listened. Real-life emotional justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it looks like quiet validation in the comments. Sometimes it looks like strangers saying, "I see you." And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Nathan wrapped his arm around me as we left the studio. He didn't say anything grand, just whispered, "Proud of you." I smiled, not because I felt brave, but because I felt real. I hadn't asked for justice. I had just told the truth. And that turned out to be more powerful than I imagined. It had been a week since the interview aired. The views kept climbing, the shares multiplied, but inside my house, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't feel heavy anymore. Not like before. This quiet was soft, full. My phone buzzed less, my chest didn't. I started spending mornings on the porch with tea instead of coffee. I liked how the light came in slowly, unhurried, like me, no longer racing to prove anything, just being. Nathan had installed a little wind chime by the door. It sang gently every time the breeze passed. That sound felt like permission, like the world telling me I was safe now. One Sunday afternoon, without planning it, I invited a few people over. Not a big gathering, just a few who had shown up when no one else did. Delora brought her famous lemon cake. Daria showed up with a camera and a bottle of cider. Our neighbors came with folding chairs and potato salad that needed no praise to be good. Jamie, the little girl I tutor at the community center, picked a flower from the curb and handed it to me like a trophy. No one asked why we were there. We didn't need a reason. We just were. Chosen family doesn't always sit under the same roof, but they always show up when it matters. We sat in a loose circle under the trees, paper plates on our laps, laughter bouncing gently across the yard. I looked around and realized this was my celebration. Not the wedding that should have been. Not the picture-perfect fantasy. This This messy, sun-drenched, unfiltered joy was the real thing. Building a peaceful life doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the form of iced tea, sticky fingers, and chairs that never needed name cards. After we ate, I asked everyone to come inside for a moment. There was something I hadn't told them, a wall I'd quietly been building. Above the fireplace, I had arranged 3 framed photos. In the center, me and Nathan under the wedding arch. To the left, a candid shot from the reception. Delora mid-laugh, Jamie licking frosting off her fingers, Daria blurred in the background adjusting her lens. And to the right, a simple white frame with handwritten words that read, "To be filled by who shows up." No one clapped, no one cried. They just stood there, taking it in, and that was enough. Healing after family estrangement isn't about replacing people. It's about no longer waiting for them to return. It's about choosing to stay fully in your own life. That night, as I washed dishes and Nathan dried them beside me, I said, "Thank you." He didn't ask what for. He just kissed my temple and said, "You're home now." And he was right. Real love after trauma doesn't always arrive grand. Sometimes it's found in chore charts, shared playlists, and the kind of silence that heals instead of harms. I don't think about the empty chairs anymore, not with bitterness, not with longing, just with peace. They existed, but they no longer define the room. I stopped asking why they were empty. I started filling the rest of the space. I replaced expectation with truth, and in doing so, I made room for joy. I mentor at the community center every Thursday now. I keep the journal in a drawer, not because I revisit it, but because it reminds me I told the story. I let it breathe, and then I let it rest. Letting go of toxic roots doesn't mean pretending it never happened. It means refusing to carry it forward.
On our first wedding anniversary, Nathan and I didn't plan a big trip. We stayed home, cooked pasta, watched old movies, laughed at nothing, held hands like it still mattered, because it does. Self-worth and peace look a lot like ordinary days that no longer feel heavy. They look like learning to belong where you are, without needing anyone else to declare it. This is what love looks like when it's real, quiet, present, unconditional. It doesn't need proof, it just shows up. And this time, I did too.
If you've ever been the one who was left out of the family photo, skipped over in the invitation, erased from the group text, or simply unseen when it mattered most, then you already know. You know the silence that isn't quiet. You know the feeling of smiling through a celebration while grieving what never arrived. And maybe, like me, you know what it's like to hold out hope long past the expiration date, hoping one day they'd see you, show up, say something, choose you. I used to think love meant loyalty at all costs, that family, no matter how careless, still deserved to be in the front row. But the truth is, presence is a choice. And true presence isn't a name on a seating chart. It's someone showing up when the moment matters. It's someone who sees you without needing a spotlight to be reminded that you exist. Emotional closure doesn't always come with an apology. In fact, most times it won't. It comes when you finally realize their silence was not your fault. When you stop trying to decode absence as your failure. When you understand that healing from toxic family isn't about fixing the broken. They chose their silence. You choose your peace. I thought telling my story would make things worse, that it would stir up shame or pity or backlash, but it didn't. It set something down that I had been carrying too long. I didn't expect the world to listen, but it did. And that taught me this: when you speak honestly, you make space for others to speak too. And that's where healing begins, not with fixing the past, but with choosing not to repeat it. I don't need their approval to validate my life. Choosing peace over validation means I no longer rehearse conversations I'll never get. I no longer beg people to come back just to leave again. I no longer offer front row seats to people who won't even RSVP. Self-worth without approval is quiet. It's stable. It doesn't chase. It builds a home inside yourself and locks the door gently behind it. If you're watching this and still waiting for someone to see you, let this be the moment you choose yourself instead. Let this be the day you stop shrinking to fit the love they're unwilling to offer. Let this be the story that reminds you, you do not need to be obedient, you do not need to be silent, you do not need to be loyal to pain. Because real love shows up. It sits in the front row. It remembers your favorite cake. It listens without defense. It looks you in the eye and says, "You matter." And the beautiful part is, you can build that. You can choose it. You can start today. Maybe you already have. I used to think my story was about being abandoned, but really, it's a story about returning. Returning to myself. Returning to truth. Returning to peace. And now, I'm home. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: real love doesn't make you beg for a seat. It shows up without being asked. I spent years waiting for recognition from people who had already made their choice. Now I make mine. I choose peace. I choose presence. I choose me. If you've ever felt like the invisible one in your own story, I hope this reminded you that you're not alone. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And if this story touched something in you, please like, share, and subscribe. You being here means more than you think. Let's keep building a space where honesty is allowed and healing begins by being heard.